Michelle Wyatt was the kind of young lady whom everyone wanted as a friend in California. As the athletic student turned 20 in the year 1980, she had a passion for tap dancing and scuba diving. She was having trouble deciding whether she should go into telecommunications or oceanography. She did, however, teach children how to dance and play musical instruments whilst working as a Safeway cashier to support herself and complete her education. It has been almost 4 decades now since neighbors in Michelle Wyatt's apartment in the town of Santee in San Diego County heard screams, and since her flatmate discovered something dreadful after she returned home the following day. It was the lifeless body of the 20-year-old college student. She had been assaulted and strangled. The tragic incident baffled every investigator who took up the file for 41 years. Years after, DNA appeared to hold some promise, but time and again, it proved ineffective. That is, until a day in 2021 when everything changed. John Patrick Hogan, a former neighbor, was ultimately identified as Michelle's murderer through investigative genetic genealogy. Nevertheless, there wasn't any arrest, prosecution, or sentencing, because Hogan had naturally passed away 17 years prior, ironically on the very same day of the year, October 9th. The team of investigators that cracked the case were led by Brian Patterson, who just retired from the Sheriff's Department after a period of over 26 years, the last 11 of which were spent investigating homicides. For years, the case remained unsolved. 38 people had been interviewed during the original investigation, but all of them were eventually ruled out as suspects, as their DNA did not give a match to the foreign DNA retrieved from Wyatt's body. Patterson stated that another detective had been tasked with the investigation, but he didn't have any luck. Shortly after that, somewhat more than 2 years ago, Patterson received an invitation to reinvestigate the case from the deputy district attorney with whom he was collaborating with on a different case. After reading up on the case, he consented to take it on. Patterson remarked, "The DA and I both grew up in Santee. Therefore, I became interested in the case, and as I looked into it, I recognized some of the people. All in all, it was really interesting, and most of the work had already been completed." Through DNA testing, they had ruled out almost 40 individuals, including the primary suspects. Thus, not much could be done about it, but the discovery of genetic genealogy kind of paved the way. The evening of October 9, 1980, saw Michelle Wyatt and Patrick Hogan crossing paths, few days after Hogan had returned to San Diego from New Mexico. In January 1980, Wyatt's father permitted her and her roommate to move into a condominium he owned at 10586 Kerrigan Court in Santee. Michelle couldn't be happier. Despite her deep love for her parents and younger brother Ray J., she was eager to be fully independent. We believe Hogan's connection to Michelle stems from his familiarity with the people residing in that complex, having lived there before, said Patterson. He was acquainted with a man who lived right next to Michelle, and because she had a pool table in her garage, they used to play pool together. So he said, "Yeah," after I spoke to him. "We've seen her, I knew her, and I even wanted to go out with her. I was kind of scared though because she's a pretty woman." Then I mentioned Patrick Hogan's name. He kept talking until it suddenly dawned on him why I had brought up his name. He said, "Oh, are you telling me he did it?" "It appears that he might have," I told him, and he remarks, "Well, of all the people I know, that's the guy who could have done something like that, but no one has ever asked about him." On the evening of 8th October, Michelle departed from the Sue Hamilton School of Dance on El Cajon Boulevard, where she had been taking tap dancing classes for 3 nights per week ever since she was 7 years old, and drove home. Here, she was greeted by her boyfriend of 4 months, Patrick Acomb, who had just finished his final class of the day at Mesa College. The two became acquainted during last spring at the Safeway store, where Michelle was employed as a cashier. Acomb, who resided next to her at the time, began paying her frequent visits before eventually asking her out on a date in July. Soon after, they became very close and started hanging out on regular basis. A few days prior to her demise, her mother half-jokingly asked her, "Hey, Michelle, are you planning to get married?" Michelle chuckled and rolled her eyes, saying, "Oh, Mom, you're embarrassing me. But yes, I think I've found the right one." When ACOM showed up, he and Michelle went to the condo's garage. There they played 3 games of pool and talked about their respective days. That morning, Michelle was exhausted from merely taking 2 of her classes. Rather than attending the 3rd one, she decided to go for a run with her boyfriend before her dancing class. Nevertheless, she won all 3 of the pool games against ACOM, and she kept teasing him about her winnings as they were leaving the garage. They then switched off the lights in the garage, returned to the condo via dining room's sliding glass doors, grabbed a seat in the living room, and watched television. Since then, ACOM has been wondering about whether they had locked the glass doors once they entered or not, though he can't remember for sure. What he does recall with clarity is that he departed through the main door just before 1 o'clock the next morning, reminding Michelle to lock the door behind him, just like he always did. That was the last time Michelle Wyatt was seen alive. Less than an hour later, a neighbor claimed to have heard Michelle's 2 co-workers crying and screaming hysterically, but they chose not to intervene. After spending the night out, Michelle's roommate, who wished to remain anonymous, came home just before 5 the following afternoon and parked her car on the Kerrigan Court curb. The July before, she had settled in with Michelle. Walking past the 2 rows of condos and onto the grassy strip which led to her own front door, the roommate found herself blinded by the intensity of the fading afternoon sun. Upon arriving at the condo, she was immediately overcome with fear of what she witnessed. The roommate recalled, "I realized that something was off since the lights were still on and the curtains were closed. Michelle would always get up early in the morning and would never leave the house unattended. As I approached the front door, I noticed something strange. The mail was still in the mailbox, and the newspaper was lying on the ground by the door. Then I opened the door, and I saw her right away, and I knew immediately." I'm not sure how I knew. Perhaps instinct. You just have a gut feeling. I dropped everything I was holding. I dropped the newspaper, the mail, a few books I had borrowed from a friend, and rushed to a neighbor's apartment across the lawn, while at the same time thinking I must be dreaming. I first dialed the police, and then I called Mrs. Wyatt. I waited for police to arrive, outside the front door of the apartment I had run to. I was not sure whether this had actually happened, and I figured the police would tell me if it was true. When they confirmed that Michelle had passed away, I found it hard to believe. All I felt like saying over and over was, "Oh my God, oh my God." Following the roommate's phone call, police officers were dispatched to the Santee apartment, where they discovered Wyatt's lifeless body right next to the front door inside. Her purse and everything in it was tossed out into the toilet. They retrieved evidence, checked for fingerprints, and captured a ton of photographs. The body was brought to the San Diego County Medical Examiner's office, where an autopsy revealed that Wyatt had passed away after being strangled by a telephone cord, hence the cause of death was ruled out to be asphyxiation. According to the press statement, traces of semen were found on her body, alleging that she had also been sexually assaulted. Subsequent to the killing, Hogan went back to New Mexico. Not much is known about his later years, aside from the fact that he got married again, had another child, was divorced, and died of a meth overdose on October 9, 2004, nearly 24 years to the day after he killed Wyatt. At the time of his death, his age was 42 years. According to the detective, this is what transpired on the tragic evening of October 9, 1980, when Michelle Wyatt became the victim of murder by John Patrick Hogan. Since there were no signs of a forcible entry, he considers there are 2 possible explanations. She either recognized him knocking on the door. Looking, she said, "Oh, this guy, I know him. Not a big deal." Perhaps there was something he needed. Perhaps he was asking for something. She lets him in. Alternatively, her boyfriend had just walked out and she opened the door thinking he was coming back. Perhaps he was watching. Perhaps he saw her boyfriend leave. Who knows? And perhaps after that she assumed it was her boyfriend coming back right away and opened the door. Without thinking, she opened that door for a stranger around 12:30 or 12:45 p.m., despite of the accounts that she wouldn't have done so. That's probably where the assault took place, in the living room. I don't think it went anyplace else, and everything he used for killing her was right there. All of Hogan's relatives, as reported by Patterson, have acknowledged that he killed Wyatt, with the exception of his first wife, who was also the mother of his eldest daughter and his high school sweetheart. She proposed that they had consensual intercourse, and after he left, she was slain by somebody else. Patterson finds it improbable that such a thing could happen. She's like really grasping. She refuses to acknowledge that her high school love could be a murderer. Wyatt's parents are appreciative of the officers who continued their investigation for over 4 decades. Louise Wyatt said, "I wish there was something I could do for them. A hug and a thank you doesn't seem like enough." 2 years after a judge ordered the release of a 911 phone call recording that Shannan Gilbert had made prior to her disappearance, the Suffolk County Police Department released the complete audio on Friday. Along with audio recordings from residents' 911 calls, the SCPD also presented a compilation of the footage featuring maps and additional visuals that described what they believed had transpired on May 1, 2010, the night she went missing. At the beginning of a news conference, Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison characterized Shannan as a lovely daughter, sister, and young woman who had a whole life ahead of her. Unbeknownst to them, the search for Shannan Gilbert eventually brought the Suffolk County officials to bodies of 4 additional young women. Their remains were found in Gilgo Beach, wrapped inside a hidden sack, dumped along a vacant beachfront parkway. An arrest was also made shortly after the discovery. Now, everyone had that question in their mind. Is there any connection between Shannan Gilbert and the 4 deceased women? Sadly, Mary Gilbert, Shannan's mother, passed away before she could witness any progress made in the case. Shannan Gilbert went missing at the age of 23. In December 2011, her body was discovered in a nearby coastal community. Authorities have stated that her death might have been an accident unrelated to the other homicides, including the multiple murders case from long ago, Gilgo 4. Till the last moments of her life, Marie Gilbert exerted pressure on authorities to deal her daughter's case with substantial consideration. She put in a lot of effort to make sure Shannan and the other victims would never be forgotten. According to John Ray, an attorney representing the Gilbert family, Marie viewed Shannan as an incidental hero since, ironically, it was because of her absence that the other 4 deceased women ended up being found and at least one person of interest was taken into custody. Beyond a series of killings and the protracted, fruitless pursuit of an alleged serial killer lies the tragedy of a perplexed family, the legacy of which could potentially be contributing to the resolution of what authorities referred to as one of the most consequential homicide investigations in Long Island history. With everything coming to light, Ray remarked, who knows how many more deaths would have been avoided now that there's an accused murderer under arrest. A tragedy struck the family once more on July 23, 2016. At the age of 52, Sarah, another daughter, repeatedly stabbed Marie Gilbert multiple times with a 15-inch kitchen knife. According to a court document, she was then struck with a fire extinguisher until she succumbed to her injuries. Sarah Gilbert received a sentence ranging from 25 years to life in prison. Ray stated that Gilbert suffered from psychological and emotional trauma following the death of her sister. Robert Kolker, the author of Lost Girls: An Unsolved American Mystery, a 2013 book that thoroughly explored the case, stated that Marie understood the only means to find perhaps some sort of meaning behind her daughter's disappearance was that it led to the discovery of those 4 women a few months later, and that without Shannan, there would be no case, no investigation, and hence no hunt for the perpetrator. She was fully aware of that, and I think that the notion that Shannan's passing had enlightened others about the truth brought her some measure of solace. Following Shannan Gilbert's disappearance on May 1, 2010, years passed with no arrest, no suspect, and no positive leads, or, as Kolker described it, barely a peep from the police or the authorities. That was until July 13th, when Rex Heuermann, a 59-year-old architectural consultant who used to work in Manhattan and resided in Massapequa Park on the southeast area of Nassau County Hall, across the bay from where the women's remains were discovered, was taken into custody by authorities. In relation to the killings of Megan Waterman, Melissa Barthelemy, and Amberlynn Costello, Heuermann entered a not guilty plea. Likewise, he was suspected of slaying Maureen Brainerd Barnes. The Gilgo Beach case stayed unresolved for more than a decade after the remains of the women were discovered, prior to his arrest. Kolker's book, which was adapted into a 2020 article in the New York Magazine, reveals that Mari was the one that pushed the authorities to take action. They wouldn't have done otherwise. She not just made a lot of noise, rather the process of fighting for her daughter Shannan changed her as well. In 2011, Mari Gilbert referred to the police inquiry as clownish, accusing them of handling it improperly. Gilbert and others have long maintained that because Shannan and the other victims were sex workers, the investigation was conducted poorly by the police. Ray stated, "By keeping the Shannan Gilbert case alive, we were able to keep all the cases alive." There's absolutely no doubt about that. The authorities had fallen into a dreamland of stalling it out. Things did not get much better after a major corruption scandal in Suffolk County law enforcement unfolded. According to court documents, Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke was detained in 2015 and charged with attacking a man who had reportedly broken into his car in 2012, stealing a suitcase containing porn and sex toys, and then plotting to obstruct the FBI's investigation regarding his conduct. Burke eventually entered a guilty plea to conspiracy for hindering with the investigation and violations of civil rights. According to the record, he received a 46-month prison sentence. Notably, a day following Burke's detention, the Suffolk County Police Deputy Commissioner stated that the FBI would be joining the investigation into the Gilgo Beach homicides. Kolker claimed that while this was going on, Mari Gilbert and the other family members united to form an influential advocacy group. He said, "They cautioned people that this wasn't simply a Hannibal Lecter film, and that actual human lives were at risk." That being said, Mari was the most provocative one out of the whole family. It was her who would step up and make noise whenever things grew quiet and ensure that the cops responded. The day when Heuermann was apprehended just as he left work close to the Empire State Building, Gilbert's second eldest daughter, Cherie, posted on a Facebook page named Praying for Shannan Gilbert, offering support for the victims' families. The time, energy, and devotion my mom and I had put into this case wasn't in vain. I had wished, hoped, and prayed for this day. She wrote, "I am grateful to be alive to witness it." Kolker, who's publishing Lost Girls, was adapted into a Netflix movie in 2020, stated, "I think Mari would have been much the same way if she was still here. She would have expressed her sympathies to the other families and rejoiced over the arrest." On February of 2022, a multi-agency task force comprising the FBI and state police was established by Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison to re-examine the case and the efforts that resulted in Heuermann's apprehension. As per the prosecution's bail application, detectives uncovered a substantial breakthrough within months, prompting them to focus on Heuermann. Prosecutors said that investigators discovered a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, registered to Heuermann, which was similar to the truck that a witness claimed Costello's murderer had been driving at the time of the killings. Afterwards, DNA was retrieved by authorities from a pizza crust dumped outside of Heuermann's Manhattan office, which matched to the Gilgo 4's purported killer. Following the apprehension, Harrison defended the police inquiry. He pointed out that the manner in which this inquiry was conducted has come under considerable scrutiny and criticism ever since the first victim was found. I can assure you that the detectives never gave up. They kept going, gathered evidence, and pursued leads. They haven't quit working and will continue to do so until we get justice for all the families affected. Harrison then reported to CNN, "We're here today and we're announcing that we're placing this animal under arrest, yet there may have been a few things that we could have done better." Karen Vergata, a 34-year-old Manhattan escort, referred to as the Fire Island Jane Doe, disappeared on the day of Valentine's in 1996. She has been identified as the second murder victim from Gilgo Beach by Suffolk County investigators on Friday. In the years between 2010 and 2011, Vergata's remains were discovered along with those of Shannan Gilbert and rest of the Gilgo 4 victims off the Ocean Parkway on southern shore of Long Island. Reporters were informed by Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney that the case is still being investigated and no charges have been filed as of yet. Tierney refrained from associating Heuermann with Vergata's demise. According to Kolker, it appears that we are coming closer to finding the explanation behind some of these deaths. However, there are still a ton of unresolved homicides on Long Island's shoreline. There's a hint of development now. Yet, in addition to celebrating the progress, I believe many people are wondering why it took so long. Shannan, who resided in New Jersey, embarked on a journey from Manhattan with her driver early on May 1, 2010, in order to visit a man at his place in Oak Beach, Long Island. She seemed irrational at a point, and the man called the driver, based on a Suffolk County Police online summary of the Gilgo Beach killings inquiry. She ran off on foot and made her way to 2 nearby house owners, after which she went missing. Authorities said that they interrogated the driver and the man Gilbert visited that morning, but found no evidence that either had anything to do with her passing. According to Suffolk County Police, the inspection of a 911 call made by Gilbert at the time, together with the information surrounding her disappearance, by the FBI and a psychiatrist, revealed that her death did not align with her being a victim of violence or a violent offender. Gilbert reportedly screamed in panic, "They're trying to kill me," during the tense 911 call. More than 7 months after Gilbert vanished, the other victims were found as a result of the lookout for her. A year after, Gilbert's body was discovered in Oak Beach. At a press conference in 2016, Mari Gilbert and Ray revealed that a private autopsy on Shannan's remains had concluded that her death was consistent with homicidal strangulation, but that not enough evidence was available to establish a specific cause of death. Mari Gilbert told reporters that day, "This is my daughter Shannan," while holding a picture of her oldest kid. She wasn't perfect. Nobody is perfect. But she was loved. She was cared for. She doesn't deserve to be forgotten. Throughout the years, Mari Gilbert's daughters frequently accompanied her at press conferences and vigils held in memory of the victims. However, Ray claimed that once Shannan disappeared and her body was subsequently found, daughter Sarah was never the same. He added that the loss of her beloved sister had a major effect on her mental health. She regarded Shannan as a demigod and looked up to her, and she was heartbroken by what transpired, with everything just simmering away in her young mind at the same time. In July 2016, Sarah Gilbert invited her mother to her house on a Sunday afternoon. Then she stabbed Mari Gilbert 227 times, battered her with a fire extinguisher, and sprayed fire extinguisher foam down her throat, according to a 2021 ruling, corroborating Sarah's conviction by the New York State Supreme Court Appellate Division 3rd Judicial Department. Sarah Gilbert posted on Facebook, "So as many of you may already be aware, my mother had passed away yesterday. My sister Sarah, who had been battling mental illness for a period of 2.5 years, killed her. My sister Stevie and I are actually crushed beyond words, considering our mother was the foundation of our family." One of Sarah's sisters contacted the police and they arrived. Per to the affidavit, Shannan Gilbert notified the police outside the house that Sarah had contacted her earlier that day, complaining that she was hearing voices. Inside the house, detectives discovered Mari Gilbert's body along with Sarah smoking a cigarette. "I killed my mom," Sarah confessed to police in a calm voice, according to security camera footage presented to the jury during the trial, despite her later admission that Gilbert was still alive. Sarah revealed to the authorities that preceding the murder, she heard voices telling her to kill Gilbert, calling her mother devil and an evil god. Mary adored her daughter, Ray added. She knew she would be in trouble when she was invited to the house, yet she chose to walk towards her death. Stevie Smith, Sarah's younger sister, testified for the prosecution during the trial, stating that Sarah had a troubled relationship with the victim who was granted custody of defendant's son after an incident that happened on February 2016, in which defendant drowned a puppy in front of the child, stated the filing. According to the prosecution, Sarah had planned the murder after her mother had Sarah taken into custody for killing the puppy several months ago. Sarah's paranoia, according to the defense, was a result of years of mental illness and torture. A forensic psychologist testified for the defense, stating that Sarah was experiencing acute signs of schizophrenia at the time of the crime. The jury's verdict stated, "We are undoubtedly sympathetic to the challenging life circumstances defendant had to face, and we have every reason to believe that she suffers from a serious mental disorder that blurs the distinction between fiction and reality." Nonetheless, the evidence plausibly backs up the jury's conclusion that the defendant had the substantial capability to understand the nature and repercussions of her actions at the time of the murder, and that what she did was unlawful. In the postscript to his best-selling book published in 2020, Kolker wrote that Mari's life, transformed by the death of one daughter, had been ended by another. As Kolker said in an interview, "She wasn't a flawless woman and was even confrontational. Yet during her final years, she took on the role of carer for her sick daughter, and her sudden passing was dreadful. However, every individual I spoke with who was close to her claimed that in her latter years she had matured as a person and had actually managed to find a way to live in spite of such horrific loss." In 1994, Wilomeana Filkins, then 81 years old, resided in East Greenbush, New York. She was known by the nickname Violet. Violet used to live on her own and had a good reputation among her neighbors. She never got married and had no kids. She was a retired Department of Education staff member who now enjoyed volunteering and gardening. Born in Rensselaer, she spent her childhood there with 7 sisters and 1 brother, before settling in East Greenbush for almost 6 decades. On August 19, 1994, when Violet's brother and niece were having trouble contacting her, they went to her apartment. It was there that they found her body. An autopsy was conducted which revealed that she was killed 2 days before her body was discovered. Violet sustained multiple concussions to her head. From the crime site, investigators gathered forensic evidence, which they preserved for later use. The motive behind was ruled to be a burglary gone wrong. Once it was determined that Violet's car had been stolen on the same day, her life was taken and later returned. A woman approached the law enforcement in 2019 with a crucial lead. Violet's case was brought up in a true crime show she was watching. The woman then remembered an ex-boyfriend who had opened up to her about his beating and robbing of a woman. She suspected that her ex-boyfriend might be culpable for Violet's demise. The ex-boyfriend's name was Jeremiah Wyatt. When the crime was committed, he was only 17 years old. Wyatt was stationed in Florida as an Air Force member before he started working as a bus driver for the elderly folks in New York. On October 1, 2019, Wyatt was interrogated by Detective Sergeant Michael Guadagnino of the East Greenbush Police Department. Wyatt grew defensive and clearly distressed. He refused to speak further with the police without an attorney. In the garage of his Rosendale, New York home, about 70 miles south of East Greenbush, authorities discovered his body the following day. Then, All of the tangible evidence from the first inquiry was submitted again by the investigators, including a wooden coffee table bearing an unidentified fingerprint. A person belonging to Wyatt's family reached out to the investigators while they were awaiting the results. That family member stated that the day investigators questioned him, Wyatt had spoken to them. In a state of panic, Wyatt phoned the relative and said he didn't want to go to jail. He admitted to the family member that he intended to rob a bank and steal a vehicle in his youth in order to raise money for college. If that wasn't sufficient proof, the findings from the DNA analysis came back in 2023, which revealed that the fingerprint found at the crime site positively matched to Wyatt. Following a press conference on January 19, 2023, the East Greenbush Police Department announced that Jeremiah Wyatt was the perpetrator who killed Wilomeana Violet Filkins. Carol Filkins, Violet's niece, expressed gratitude to the authorities and recalled her aunt as a modest woman who lived a quiet life and would have never imagined something like this to happen. During the news conference, she continued, "We're all very grateful that this case has now finally been resolved." If you find this video compelling, show your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. By doing so, you'll stay updated about the latest investigations and mysteries. Your support means the world to us as we continue to pursue the truth in the world of unsolved cases.